Income Tax 2020, Practice Problem 1, Presentation 45, Rental Property, Schedule E. We're going to set up a worksheet that we can use to then input into the tax return. Come in, relax with Income Tax 2020. Here we are in our Lacerte tax software. You don't need the Lacerte tax software to follow along. However, I do think they have a 30-day free trial. So if you can get access to a promo or demo version of it or any other tax software, it could be a good tool to practice with. Continuing on here with our comprehensive practice problem number 1 with Eric and Jane Smith living in Beverly Hills 90210. The first portion of the practice problem, we looked into the income items primarily. The second portion, then we looked at the above the line deductions to get to the adjusted gross income. Then we looked at itemized deductions and focused in on them. And then we added the Schedule C business. So then we added a sole proprietor business. Then we went to page 2 and we considered some of the credits that could be involved. And now we're going to be adding then rental property. So now we'll look at a Schedule E type of business, rental property on top of this as well. Rental property will typically be on a Schedule E. So note the Schedule E will be similar to the Schedule C, but there's going to be some different kind of rules related to the Schedule E and C, primarily with regards to like passive income limitations and possibly with the calculation of self-employment tax and whatnot between the two. But the basic idea is going to be similar between the two. We're going to have an income statement. Basically, the Schedule C and E are income statements related to some kind of business activity. The Schedule E, in this case, is going to be specific to basically the rental activity. And we're going to imagine here we have the rental property for it. Now, note that if you had rental property in the past for entering this into the system, and you were using the same tax software, that would roll, some of the information would roll forward, primarily the information related to the depreciation of the property. In other words, we're going to have to put the property on the books and use the tax software to calculate the depreciation. So we don't have the rollover here. We're just going to add the property at this point in time, but just realize that in practice, of course, if it's not the first year that the rental property was rented, then the rental property would roll forward and you'd have some of that information in the system. If it's the first time we've entered this information into our tax system, it's a new client, in other words, but they had rental property in the past, then what we would want to do, I would say that would be a more complex return. I would enter it into the 2019 tax software first, try to match up the depreciation schedules as best we can, then pro forma it forward. So once again, once we get to 2020, everything should roll forward with regards to the depreciation. That's going to be one thing that will typically need to be calculated kind of in the tax software after we get the information. So what we would need from a client then would be something like this. We'll have a little bit more basic of an information. It's going to be some kind of income statement. So they might give us a QuickBooks file like this, or they might just provide us with the income statement. And then one of the things that, of course, we're probably going to have to add to this income statement is the depreciation, because we're going to need our software in order to calculate the tax depreciation. So you can have at least one adjusting entry, you would think, to the Schedule E. Now, a Schedule E could be fairly basic like this, or you could have some more activity going on in a similar fashion we did with the Schedule C. We're going to keep it fairly basic with this item, and then we're just going to add the depreciation adjustment to it in our example here. So I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to add this to our worksheet in the same way we did with the Schedule C, and we'll kind of format our worksheet. So you'll recall we had a simple Schedule C here, but then we downloaded the worksheet. So we downloaded our worksheet and we did this little schedule to try to be able to track our adjustments. And you only need to do that really if it's going to be more of a complex type of return. This return here, it looks fairly basic, so we may not need to do it, but I know I have at least one adjusting entry related to the rental property, so I'll just go through the process of doing that again. So I'm gonna export this then to the Excel worksheet. Notice if you couldn't export it to the Excel worksheet, you could just data input it into the Excel worksheet. It's a little bit tedious. Doesn't take too much time though, typically. So if we're going to go back on over here, I'm going to go ahead and export this. I'm going to say, and oftentimes I like to close the Excel worksheet and I'll export this over just like we did with the Schedule C. I'm going to create a new worksheet, but it's going to go to the existing workbook, that being the workbook that I have set up here. And so I'm going to go to an existing workbook. I'm going to go ahead and locate that workbook, which I think is in Here, it's going to be under the rental property, practice problem. That's the one I want. That's the one. And then I'll go ahead and export that. So here it is. I'm going to do the same kind of formatting we did with the Schedule C, and I'm going to do it a lot quicker here just because we've already seen it in the past. Basically, same process as with the Schedule C. Whenever I upload this from QuickBooks, it gives me this first tab. I'm going to delete it because I don't need that. I don't need that tab. So I'm going to right-click on it and delete that. And all right, and then this tab is the new tab. I'm going to call it Schedule E, or Schedule E. And I'm going to pull it all the way to the right. I'm going to left click on it. I'm going to drag it all the way to the right because I want to put it like at the end here next to my Schedule C. And then I'm going to format it in a similar fashion as we did with this item. So I'm just going to format this thing. So I'm going to make it a little bit larger. And then I'm going to format it. So I'm going to then go to the second view and say OK. And that highlights the fact that we have these splits on. And I want to get rid of those splits. So I'm going to go to the view up top. We're going to go to the windows and remove the splits. Remove the splits. We don't want those. Those are not good. And then we're going to go back on over here and I'm just going to delete some of the columns we don't need. I'm going to get rid of these 3 columns and put everything into 1 column and go from there. So I'm going to get rid of this first row entirely. Don't want that. Don't need that row. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to put everything into 1 column. So I'm going to move all this over into 1 column. I'm going to say Control X, cut. I'm going to put it all over here, paste, Control X, paste. I'm going to take these 2, Control X, paste, and then I'm going to say Control X and paste, Control X and paste, Control X and paste. So now I can remove these first 3 columns. I'm going to get rid of those. I'm going to right click on them and delete them. And then these all the subtotals I don't want. I basically want to make this into a trial balance. So like this income, I don't need that. I don't need this up here. So I'm going to remove these items. I'm going to highlight the entire row, delete those. And then I like to make it in terms of debits and credits. And I'm going to make the credits negative. And that means the income accounts are going to be negative. So I'm going to make this one, the rental income, negative. This kind of confuses people sometimes, but you don't need to do it this way. Like you could use positive, plus and minus. But if you want to use debit and credit format, which I tend to like to do, then I'll make that the credit as a negative number, which will be bracketed. Then I'm going to bracket it by, I'm going to select the entire worksheet with a little triangle here. I'm going to right click on the worksheet. We're going to go down to the formatting of the cells. And let's make that currency. And then I don't think I need any decimals. And I'll bracket the negative numbers and make them red. So I'm going to say, okay, let's do that. That looks good. And then I don't need this second total column. I don't want that. I'm going to delete that. All the expenses are going to be positives, and I'll keep that subtotal right there. Just doesn't bother me too much for now, at least. And they're all positive numbers here. So I'll keep that. I'm going to get rid of the underline on this side. So I don't need the underline. And then totals, I'm going to get rid of the total expenses. And all this down here. So all we have is a nice little income statement that's in like a trial balance type of format. And then I'll typically want to format this a little bit. Notice this is formatted as 8 and Arial, whereas over here we're on Arial and 10. I'm going to use Arial and 10 over here to format the entire sheet in the same formatting, so I don't have different text and sizes. I do that by going to the Home tab, Clipboard. I'm just going to copy the formatting, then I hit the triangle and paste it on the entire worksheet. So there we have that. And then I'm just going to say that the net income I'll put down here. Net income is now going to be the sum, and I don't need to do any subtraction problems because I did the debit and credit thing. So I'm just going to say the credits minus the debits. That means income because it's a credit. A net income of $2,980. That should still match out what we have in our source document. It does, so I didn't mess it up. That looks good. And then I like to see it in debits and credits. So although we don't have a balance sheet, I'll typically make a balance sheet like balancing column just to have something that's in balance. So then I can record something, journal entries that are in balance and do like the double entry accounting system, even though we only have the income statement. So I'll typically insert a couple rows, and then I'm just going to call this the balance sheet, which is the part that we don't have because we only have the income statement, but it's going to be the negative sum of all this is going to be the top half, the balance sheet. So I'm just going to say this is the negative sum of this, so that now I can have my debits and credit calculation. Debit and credit is going to be the sum of this, and that should add up to 0. So now the 0 means the debits and credits are equal, and when I enter journal entries, I have something that's in balance now. So I could think of it as a trial balance, and I can use normal journal entries, debits and credits and whatnot in the double entry accounting system. So then I'm just going to format this. I typically do the kind of fancy formatting here. We're going to go to the Home tab, and I'm going to say conditional formatting. And if this is going to be greater than, let's say, 1, we want to make it red. So I'm going to say make it red if it's greater than 1. So if it's like 2, it turns red. And then if it's less than 1, if it goes less than 1 or negative 1, like negative 2, then it turns red. And then if it's in between 1 and negative 1, I'm going to say if it's in between those two, we want to make it between negative 1 and 1, going to make it green. So green is good. Red means there's a problem. Okay, so there we have that. And then I'm just going to add a couple columns here so we can do our journal entries. So I'll add 3 columns. Going to go from A to C, right click, and insert some columns there. I'm going to make the first one a little bit larger. I'll make one more column. Right click, one more column, 4 columns. And this is going to be the description. So description, or let's just say accounts, debits, credits, right? And then I'm gonna bold the entire worksheet. I like to see it in bold. So I'm gonna hit the triangle, entire worksheet, Home tab, font group, bolding it. I'm gonna center these two, Home tab, alignment, and center. So there we have that. Now this one I'd like to pull down so I can put some headers on top. So you could select the whole thing and like drag it down. But I think it's easier once you work with longer worksheets to highlight the cells you want to have a row above. Just the cells, not the whole column this time. And then right click, and I'm going to insert. And then I want to shift these down so that won't have an impact on anything to the right or left of it. So I'm going to say, okay, there we go. And this is going to be, I'll say the beginning trial balance. These are the adjustments, and this is the ending trial balance, I'm going to say. And then we'll center these items. So I'll select them, Home tab, alignment, center. And then oftentimes I'll make this like the reverse color. So it's the headers will be the reversed colored. So Home tab, font group, let's make this like black and white. So that's the headers. And then I'm going to sum up on this side. So this is just going to be our adjustments. So the first column plus the adjustment. So all I need is the sum function because I'm using debits and credits here. So I'll sum them up. The credits are negative, and then I'll just add that down like so, And then I'm going to copy this across. So I'm going to select these two and copy this across. Autofill. And so there we have that. And so then let's put some formatting. I'm going to go to the Home tab, font group, and we'll put some brackets around that. So there's our brackets. So that looks good. And maybe down here, maybe we do the reverse coloring down here just to show that that's kind of like the end of the trial balance. It might be a little bit easier to see. Just depends on what you want to do with that. And then I'm going to make this a little bit smaller here. And let's do our reverse coloring on this. I'm going to make that black and white because that's our headers there. This could probably be a little larger. This could probably be a little smaller. And then sometimes I like to make these blue just to show where the data input will be. And I typically use the blue that the Excel is Fun guy has. He's got a YouTube channel, Excel is Fun. He's just started using this that blue color right there, which you could find on More, and then Standard, and then that blue color. I've gotten used to using that blue color. Nothing special about it. Just that's what I just got used to using. So Home tab, font group, and then we put the brackets there. And then I'm going to put the little blue here because that's where our data input's going to go. And it really helps actually to make these things blue. It seems kind of silly. Like all this color stuff I didn't do before, but it actually saves time because your eye goes right to it. So if you don't do that, then you start posting things to the wrong column sometimes, or I do, and it takes longer. So there we have it, and that's going to be our starting point. So now we can just data input this into the to the tax software and then make any adjustments that we need. Now we're not going to have a whole lot of adjustments here. If the Schedule E was more complex, you might have similar adjustments we had over here, like with the Schedule C. But we're just going to add mainly the adjustment related to the depreciation on the property, which is something that'll typically be calculated by the tax software, and then we'll keep it fairly simple from there, just to show a Schedule E in our kind of more complex tax return.